Welcome. Good evening. We are going to start our CERTS webinar on Can I Be Happy When My Child is Unhappy? We've got just about half of our attendees, that is those that have registered, are already here. So we're going to go ahead and start. I'm Craig Rodabaugh. I am currently the clinical director of Kolob Canyon Residential Treatment Center. I'm a marriage and family therapist and have been working with teenagers and their families for a long time. Love doing what I do. And so I hope this is helpful to you. Those of you that know me, I noticed a couple of our students are on, the former parents of students are on our webinar tonight. So you have heard some of this probably. I'm going to talk about what's in your control and out of your control a couple of times. But I do just want to start talking about what does it mean to be happy. So we are going to just go with that, talking first about what makes you happy. And I do want you just to think in terms of how do I emotionally react to this? When I am, with my child is happy, I feel happy. I know someone who had a sign hanging up in their home that said, I am only as happy as my saddest child, which made me sad to think that, well, then you've given up your control over your happiness to your children. And at the same time, I get some of that. My children enjoying good health makes me happy. Being rich makes me happy. Or just barely having enough money to pay my bills makes me happy. So what does the research tell us? That's really the question. What the actual research says is having friends, a spouse or a partner, a meaningful connection with another human being is the number one thing that creates happiness in our lives. Most of us see that as pretty intuitive, right? Research also says that sex in a committed relationship is something that brings us happiness. All right. A short commute time correlates highly with happiness. The closer you are to home, the more happiness you report. Participating in shared events, exciting new novel activities, going on trips, doing new things together creates higher scores in happiness. Helping other people, altruism, serving food at a homeless shelter, donating time, clearly connected to feeling happier. And, again, not a surprise, exercise. People that exercise regularly report happier scores than people who don't exercise. So what does this mean? Does this fit for you? Probably. And I can tell you that at least two of these things are not true for me, and I feel pretty happy. One of those is my commute time. And I have a long commute time, and I really, really feel happy most of the time. Okay? Natural happiness, getting what we want. That's just what we were talking about. Things that naturally occur in our lives that give us pleasure or enjoyment because of the situation that we find ourselves in. That's what the researchers refer to as natural happiness, okay? Which is a very nice thing. And most of us like that idea. Some of us don't. Depend on that. And that's where I want to go. The research talking about what other option do we have? What if we're not getting what we want? Which is the situation that most of us find ourselves in, at least periodically, if not regularly. Okay? So synthetic happiness, which is happiness that we create for ourselves when we don't get what we want. And for a long time, there's been an assumption that synthetic happiness is not as good as natural happiness. It just can't be, because all we're doing is talking ourselves, ooh, that should be one word, into that happiness, right? And yet the research doesn't bear that out. Synthetic happiness is every bit as real and enduring as natural happiness. We're going to take a look at some specific examples of that, and we're going to actually create some happiness for yourselves at the end of this if you want to participate in that. All right, so synthetic happiness. most of us are really bad estimators of what makes us happy. So again, always researchers, somebody puts people into groups and they share with them, which of these two groups do you think would be happiest 1 year after the experience? So do you think winning $1 million in the lottery or becoming a paraplegic, losing the use of your legs 1 year after losing the use of your legs, or 1 year after winning at least $1 million in the lottery, which group would be happier? And the answer is they have the equal amount of happiness. Now, most people are going to tell you that they cannot really buy into the idea that winning $1 million is just as happy producing as becoming a paraplegic. So why does the research support that? People losing their legs obviously have talked themselves into being okay in their happiness. And I want you to think in terms tonight of these people are truly as happy. In fact, there's some research now that says they might be happier, okay? So I'm going to give us 4 people that have gone through what most of us would consider unhappy events, and they have had a report exactly the opposite. Jim Wright, which some of you may be my age or remember that as a congressman, ended in disgrace. Moreese Bickham, Larry Langerman, and Pete Best, which, again, if you're a Beatles fan, may know that Pete Best was the original drummer for the Beatles. All right, so Jim, again, congressman, gets caught in a financial scandal, wrote a book. People bought his book, but bought it by caseloads as not really people that wanted the book, but as a way to get around fundraising issues. He was the first Speaker of the House to resign in a scandal. Went bankrupt, financial ruin. And Jim is quoted as saying, "I am so much better off physically, financially, mentally, and in every other way." Jim Wright's a politician, so maybe he's used to kind of spinning things, right? But this is really what Jim Wright has consistently said. All right, Moreese Bickham, the other end of the spectrum. Moreese Bickham is an African-American man that lived in Louisiana. He's convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder. He's sentenced to death. He spends 14 years in solitary confinement for 23 hours per day. After a bunch of challenges to his conviction, the conviction is changed to life without parole. And then that's determined to be defined as 75 years. So Moreese Bickham is in prison for a crime which he most likely did not commit. In fact, the general consensus is that he didn't commit it at this point. And parole is denied. But when they look at it, Louisiana at the time has a legal standing that you get good behavior applies for every year you're in. If you have good behavior, you get off for 2 years. So he's released after 37 years in a prison in Louisiana. And what Moreese Bickham says is, "I don't have one moment's regret. It was a glorious experience." Seriously? 37 years in a prison in Louisiana. I'm not sure it would be different in any prison in anywhere else. And it was a glorious experience. Seriously. I have a hard time believing this. Moreese Bickham has been on several national news shows and has maintained this was a very positive experience for him. Harry Langerman. Harry was the man who isn't a millionaire. Harry is famous for his story of going to his brother-in-law in the early years and saying, "Hey, I want to buy a McDonald's franchise." Asking his brother-in-law to loan him some money. His brother-in-law tells him, "Nobody eats hamburgers. That's just not going to happen. I'm not loaning you the money." Turns out people do eat hamburgers, and McDonald's franchise are very financially lucrative. And Harry is quoted as saying, we should add, Harry really never moved up in the world. He became a middle manager in the Black Angus chain of steakhouses. and is quoted as saying, "I believe it turned out for the best." Most of us would rather have a McDonald's franchise than be a middle manager in Black Angus chain. Or maybe not. Okay? The last, and again, most interesting to me, is Pete Best. So I'm not sure if any of you remember Pete. I don't remember Pete. To me, Ringo was the drummer in the Beatles. Pete Best was the original drummer. Beatles are practicing, they're playing, they're famous for having played a lot of music, which was one of the things that is credited them with their improvement, their positive success. Just before, well, Pete is also thought of as being the most attractive Beatle at the time. Manager liked him the most out of all the Beatles, and the other Beatles liked him the least. In fact, the rest of the Beatles come to their manager and say, "We don't like Pete, get rid of him." Manager says, "Wow, don't really want to do that." They say, "No, we really want you to get rid of him." So the night before the Beatles actually sign their first record deal, Pete Best gets fired. He is thrown out of the Beatles. Off you go. Pete didn't take this very well. Pete was angry. Pete went through a bunch of lawsuits against the Beatles, none of which were successful. He had a long series of alcohol problems. And then Pete met a woman, got married, turned his life around, and led his career as a session drummer, meaning he would fill in for people on albums, backgrounds, never joined another band, never really enjoyed any of the success that the other Beatles had. And he's quoted as saying, "I'm happier than I would have been with the Beatles." In fact, Pete is also quoted as saying, "I'm happier because I would have never met my wife if I'd stayed with the Beatles." Huh, all right. Maybe that's one of those things that they said the most important predictor of natural happiness is being in a committed relationship. Yeah, maybe. For people that most of us have had experiences that would seem to create unhappiness are reporting happiness. Why? How? Well, here's one of the things that we honestly don't understand about how the brain processes what we choose and what we say we're happy about. Very interesting, and I don't think anyone actually understands how this works still, but the research has been replicated and it's very accurate. This is research that came out of Harvard. They took a bunch of Harvard students and said, "Hey, we're doing some research. We would like you to come in and help us understand which impressionistic paintings people like the most. We'd like you to come in and rank these prints," and they would show them 6 prints and say, rank them from 1 to 6. And to compensate you for coming in, we're going to give you one of these prints. So they come in, they rank these prints from 1 to 6, and they track how they rank them. And no matter which ones they picked, no matter what order they put them in, they would come back in and say, "Hey, thank you. We appreciate all you've done. We have pictures number 3 and number 4 of the prints that you ranked. Which one do you want?" Very consistently, they picked number 3. They liked it more than number 4 in the rankings. So they picked number 3 as the one they wanted. They got that print, they took it home. Sometime later, they were called back and saying, "Hey, we have had some corruption in our data. We need you to come back in and do this process again." So they come back in and re-rank the pictures. And interestingly, very consistently, the one that they had picked as number 3, the one that they took home, has now moved up in their rankings to number 2. It's not the one they like the most, but it's the one they like the second most. Even more interesting, the one they picked as number 4, the one that they didn't pick to take home with them, has now become number 5. So liking the owned print increased, and liking of the print that they didn't choose decreased. When we actively make a choice, somehow in our brains, the item becomes more valuable. All right, so of course this is happening. We talk ourselves into it. Cognitive dissonance theory tells us the one that I have obviously is better than the one I don't have. So these researchers, quite the interesting lads, decide, hey, let's redo this. In fact, we happen to have access to a group of anterograde amnesiacs. Again, Boston, Harvard Medical, lots of medical schools, lots of attention, lots of care. There is a group of anterograde amnesiacs. Sorry about that. So this means that they can't make new memories, generally from a brain trauma. I think actually almost always from a brain trauma. And from the moment of the trauma, they don't create new memories forward. They can remember things in their past that happened before the trauma, but nothing new. So they think, wait, this is going to be a really interesting group. Let's see what happens when we take it to these people who have anterograde amnesia. So they do put them through the same test. They rank them 1 through 6. They get to pick one of the pictures. Then they come back a little while later and say, hey, we would like to give you a memory test. They don't say another memory test because they honestly don't remember taking the first one. They have anterograde amnesia. They don't know this has ever happened before, and they cannot remember it happening. Okay? They ask them if they remember any of this. They don't. They verify that the anterograde amnesia is in fact intact. So they re-rank these pictures 1 through 6, and the same results happen. Number 3 became number 2. Number 4 became number 5. Linking of the own print increased and liking of the print not chosen decreased. They had no memory of having this done. There was no way that they could say they're talking themselves into this. There is something at work in our brains that synthesizes information differently when we deliberately choose something as desirable to us, as something we like, as something we prefer over something else. All right? So think about that for a minute. I'm saying that the very power of choosing changes the way we think about our satisfaction, about our happiness with the choice that we make. Okay? That we're not talking ourselves into this, or at least there's more to it than just cognitive dissonance. Right? All right, so the next interesting thing about this is that we tend to think having lots and lots of choices makes us happy. We believe that eating at the Cheesecake Factory, where there are dozens, if not 100 different menu items, is much preferred to going to a cafeteria where they just give us what they're serving that day. Okay? Most of us would believe that. I believe that. And if it is natural happiness we're talking about, getting what we want, then freedom, the ability to change our minds, make our choices, have multiple options, freedom is our friend. Now, interestingly, it is the enemy of synthetic happiness. Meaning, if we're not getting actually what we wanted, if we're finding ways for using DBT skills, we're turning the mind or using radical acceptance to manage our happiness, our mood, then choice, freedom, is actually the enemy of happiness. Why do you say that, Craig? Well, once again, we turn to Harvard, right? Harvard recruits some people and says, hey, we are having a photography class. And we want you to come in, take a bunch of pictures, and you are going to submit 2 pictures as your final in the class, and we will evaluate them and give you a grade. The difficulty of this is we are going to keep one of these pictures. It goes into our archives, it's filed away as proof of the class, and one of them we're going to give back to you. And you're the one that gets to decide which one you keep and which one you give up. So they're putting the students in a situation of needing to choose. Now, here's the interesting part of the study. They tell half of the participants in the study, hey, you have 4 days to change your mind. This is the reversible group. You can reverse your decision for up to 4 days. You can change your mind about which one of these pictures that you want to keep. You're going to give us both of them, and we're going to give one back to you, and you have 4 days to say, wait, that's not the one I wanted. Okay? Buyer's remorse, which most of us go through in this situation. Now, the other group is called the irreversible group. You are stuck with your choice. The moment you say that's the one you want to keep, done deal. The other is shipped off to some unknown location where it's archived and we just can't retrieve it. Okay? So most of us are going to predict what? We're going to predict that we like having choice. Almost 90% of them said, I believe that I would like the choice to change my mind. And yet what really happened when we looked at the group and assessed their happiness afterwards, they couldn't predict their choice. They weren't accurate in that. And the people that had the ability to change their minds were significantly less happy with their choice than people who were stuck with their photo. People that were stuck liked their picture. People that didn't like their picture. So what this is telling us is that when we have options to change, we doubt our ability to predict well. When we have a limited amount, when this is what we have, and I think this is the power of radical acceptance in the DBT way of talking about skills. This is what I've got. I don't have to like it, but it's what I'm going to just accept as reality for me. People are happier. All right, so here's an interesting question. What does this mean for you? What's the implication of the idea that having more choices when you feel stuck, when more choices or feeling stuck, which is going to create more happiness? So one of the things that's most interesting for me is when we have parents enter one of our programs and they say something like, hey, if you don't like your therapist, you can change therapists. And so they go into that therapeutic relationship thinking, I'm not sure I'm going to like this therapist, and I may even look for reasons not to like this therapist or this teacher or this boss or this school if I know I can change. Now, I'm not sure that this is always, well, I know it's not always, it's a percentage, but the idea that we give people outs doesn't increase their happiness. In fact, it decreases their happiness. If you don't like the program, we'll look for a new one. If you don't like the school, we'll look for a new one. If you don't like your spouse, you can look for a new one. When we believe that we have an irreversible choice, we're happier. And interestingly, there's some research on religious marriages that suggest marriages of highly religious people that have a perception that divorce is an unacceptable outcome. They report happier marriage satisfaction scores and have fewer divorces. Now, I'm not sure that's always a function of happiness. Sometimes it's just a function of commitment. But it's an interesting idea with this research that says, hey, when you have an irreversible choice, you find a way to be happier with that than if you have multiple choices. Okay? So what can you do to increase your happiness? Because here's what I'm suggesting. That choice is yours. That you are not dependent on the health of your child, on their happiness, on your commute, on your health, for your happiness. And again, going back, I have a 90-minute commute every day, 45 minutes each way. And I love my commute. It's beautiful. Now, if I were commuting in an urban center, I may not be saying that, but I commute in rural southern Utah where I think it's beautiful. Now, the other thing is, generally, I think of myself as a happy person, and I have a child who's unhealthy. My oldest daughter has a terminal illness. which is not a happy thing for any parent. And I'm not suggesting I'm happy about her terminal illness. I'm suggesting that I watched my daughter respond with, I am going to choose to be happy because I'm not going to have my son grow up with an unhappy mom. She has one child. And I watched her decide, I am going to be happy. And it's been a very empowering thing for me to decide I'm going to be happy too. So I started looking at the research and what makes us happy. What facilitates being happy when you're not getting what you want? Numerous things, okay? Planning a trip or a vacation. Now, the interesting thing about this research is it's not actually going on the trip or the vacation. If you've been on a trip with your family, you may notice that it's not a highly satisfying thing sometimes with lots of people wanting different things. But the planning of it, high happiness satisfaction scores. Meditating. If there's one thing that you come away, well, maybe gratitude. If there's three things that you come away from this webinar thinking, hey, I'd like to do more of those, meditation should be one of those. You don't have to be great at it. You don't have to be a yogi. You don't even have to have a formalized training. Just start sitting with yourself. Pick what you can. Number of hours, number of minutes, not ever. Hours is not going to happen for you. When I first started meditating, I was at a seminar on happiness, and I'm listening to all this research being put out, and I think, well, how hard can that be? It sounds like something that the research is really consistent on. The research around meditation is phenomenal. There's some research that says teenagers who were taught to meditate, controlling for the other variables, lost weight. There's research that says it decreases your blood pressure, research that it says it just plain increases your satisfaction with life, all from meditating, sitting with yourself, breathing, focusing inward. So at one of the breaks, I went out to the courtyard, set my phone for 10 minutes, and just breathed. And I was convinced my phone was broken because when I looked at it, it had to be much longer. It hadn't gone off, the alarm. And I'd been meditating for 7 minutes. It felt literally more like 15 or 20. This is not an easy thing to do. Meditation is one of the fundamental ways for you to increase your happiness. It is a demanding process. It takes consistency and it takes a willingness to build up to a meditative process. But I would strongly encourage you to think about learning to meditate, giving yourself, starting with 10 minutes, you may not be able to do 10 minutes, working up to 30 at least, where you can just give yourself 30 minutes of time where you can just breathe in and say, this is the only thing that I have to do in this moment, is breathe. There is nothing stronger around the research in happiness than meditation. Being around happy people also facilitates happiness. Well, there's an interesting thing. Birds of a feather flock together. Being around sad people creates more sadness. Being around happy people creates a happier mood. Our grandmothers were right when they created these ideas that birds of a feather, right? Looking for the good. Being able to, with DBT, it's called lemonade or find the rainbow. This is the skill of being able to find something positive in your day. The research that most strongly supported this asked people to just write down a blessing that they felt they had had in their life for 12 days and then look at them for another 12 days. So you do one every day for 12 days, at least one, and then you review it for 12 days. People were happier. We strongly encourage our students at CoLab, in fact required as part of their level work, to keep something that we call the drops of awesome and ask students to just write down something that went well during your day. I spent almost a year keeping a gratitude journal, got out of the habit when I went on a vacation to Europe. Actually, it was a working trip with Mountain Springs, and have never gotten back into the habit of keeping it as consistently. And I believe I was happier when I kept a gratitude journal. Service. Again, getting outside yourself, stop worrying about yourself. I had one student that I worked with, In fact, I think Janet's on the webinar or was, who set up service for her daughter when she left Kolob, and as part of her aftercare plan, it was expected that she would donate time helping other people. And I kept waiting for her daughter to say, "Are you kidding?" And instead she went, "I love this idea. I want to do this." So Janet, I'd love to get an email to find out if Anna actually followed through on that. But the research is really clear that doing something for someone else doesn't have to even be in an organized way. The research is just doing kind acts for people is as effective as participating in an organized type of service. Your happiness scale increases. Mention the gratitude journal. If you will just write down these things on a daily basis, and most of us really struggle to do this, it's a self-discipline issue of actually recording something daily. I've had other people just do it weekly and kind of go back over the week. The research says it's effective, but not as effective as daily recording, and then review it. Go back and look at your journal. The review part's an essential part. We found that people were not as happy just writing it as when they reviewed it. But there is some theory around journaling and writing things down that your brain encodes the information differently than if you just say it or think it. That the physical nature of writing, not typing interestingly, or texting, but the physical nature of writing somehow encodes information differently in the brain. And so writing the journal and then reviewing it, really critical. Interestingly, smile. If your kids haven't shared with you the skill of half smile, which is one of the DBT distress tolerance skills, this is some really interesting research, again, that no one quite understands, although people are making careers around saying they do. If you will just smile, the physical behavior of smiling improves your mood. You feel happier. Even one of the research projects was a freshman psychology class. The professor made little devices that pushed up the corners of students' mouths, so they didn't even have to physically smile. It was done for them. Students reported improved mood in the group that had the physical smiling. And what we find is that people that smile naturally, that are just smilers, report happiness in greater degrees than people who don't smile. Some of my favorite research actually came from a professor who analyzed baseball cards and the pictures of baseball players on the baseball cards, and he looked for what their research defined as a Duchesne smile, a big, broad smile. And he theorized that baseball players that had that Duchesne smile would have more positive life outcomes than players who didn't. And the way they operationally defined that was being married, having positive, not having substance abuse issues, and there were a couple other things. I'm sorry, I'm not remembering them. But just looking at their pictures on a baseball card, he had almost a 70% accuracy rate of picking happy people versus unhappy people. Now, I'm just intrigued by that research because it seems to me like photographers always want me to smile, and I'm really not very good at smiling. But smiling, even when you feel sad, physical ability just to smile will increase your happiness. And you can do this anywhere at any time. This is one of the most important skills we teach our kids, that ability to just stop being sad in the moment, put on a half smile, and you'll feel better. Not on the slide, but one of the other DBT skills, less research, but also interesting and anecdotally we find to be very effective with our kids at Kolob, is the DBT skill of willing hands, which is literally just holding your two hands out in front of you with the palms up, fingers spread, and just holding that position for a few minutes. Could not tell you why it's effective. It does seem to be consistently effective. In fact, I have students that will do willing hands during the middle of family therapy sessions when they're frustrated or not getting something that they want in planning a home visit, and they will simply put their hands out in front of them as a way of getting through the moment and increasing their satisfaction. Again, something you can do anywhere and totally in your control. Okay, I want to show you this short little clip, and I'm trying to keep track of time, plenty of time. This is a clip from Soul Pancake, and I am trying to show it to you. And I'm assuming that our technical advisor, who happens to be my wife, is correct in how we're going to do this. Let's see if it starts. Okay. So I really like this clip because this is a very simple, normal thing to do. To write a letter, to first figure out who has contributed or done something good in your life. Writing the letter to someone you appreciate or to whom you're grateful, and expressing what they've done and including at least one specific thing. You heard things in the letter, in the video clip, specific things, dropping everything, coming to visit me. What the gratitude letter, in fact, there's research, you listen to their outcomes. There's research that says if you write the letter, you have an improvement in happiness. If you share the letter, that is, you tell the person on the phone or in person, then your happiness is even greater. And one study found that if you wrote it down, copied it, and gave a copy of it to the person that you're grateful to, your happiness actually improved even more. Now, I don't know that that's been replicated. I've only seen that one time. But I do think that there's something invaluable about having this exchange with the person to whom you're grateful. Remembering what they did, being able to express that to them. And I think there's just something inherently nice about people's responses when we're grateful to them. I presented a similar webinar, a workshop to this at the National Association of Therapeutic Schools and Programs a couple of years ago, and actually had the attendees create their gratitude letter. And in hindsight, I really wished I had evaluated them. The conference told me I had to send that through the Human Rights Committee in order to do research, which I didn't do. But I did ask what they thought, and consistently, this is a group of therapists and administrators at residential treatment centers and wilderness programs and therapeutic boarding schools, consistently thought they felt better after having written the letter. Now, some people didn't write the letter. Some people were too busy. And it was interesting that they wanted to say they felt better too, just having attended the workshop. So maybe just thinking about gratitude is helpful. But I really would like you to consider when you're feeling that happiness is out of your control. You are sad, legitimately sad, because your child's struggling with something. Your husband or wife's done something that's hurtful to you. For me, I'm at my worst when I'm driving in my car. I'm the most disrespectful to human beings when they're driving around me and I'm by myself. Taking some time to be grateful to someone specific will change the way you experience life. Okay? So I'd like you to think in terms of actually following through and writing a gratitude letter. In fact, if you'll do it tonight, your gratitude is going to increase. We just went through this. The last line is important. That sometimes, and again, I don't remember the percentages of this, but a significant number of people had happiness that lasted up to 6 months after writing the gratitude letter. And this was the 6 months was the framed letter presentation. 6 months is a long time to feel better. I would be curious to see, what they controlled for. But I do think that we as human beings are prone to feel better when we are grateful. I want you to walk away from this webinar believing that you have control over your happiness, that happiness is not just about getting what we want. I would prefer to have a daughter that wasn't ill. And I've decided that will not control my happiness, largely motivated by watching her decide that it's not going to control her happiness. But our happiness is in our control. Even when things around us are unhappy, we have the ability to control our happiness index. And I want you to think in terms of not just, oh, I need to talk myself into it, but going back to those anterograde amnesiacs, there is something biological in the process. There is something that actually our brain synthesizes choices differently and our happiness differently when we exercise choice. So believe that you get to choose. That's the end of tonight's webinar. I hope that it's been entertaining and informative. I believe wholeheartedly that we truly can have happiness and that it's a reasonable thing to expect in our lives. So thank you, and go write your letters.